Welcome to the second mini lecture of 5 on Shakespeare's tragedy, Macbeth. In this mini lecture, I will walk us through the 4 scenes of Act 2, continuing to analyze plot, character, and looking into themes of darkness and also some of the relationships that are developing between the characters in the play, particularly that between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Act 2, Scene 1 opens with a new character that we're meeting for the first time, who wasn't in the first act. We meet Fleance. Fleance is Banquo's son. And if you remember from Act 1, the witches had a prophecy that Banquo's sons would be kings. He would get kings, though he would be none. So this Fleance, according to the prophecy then, is in line somehow to be king. It's not clear how he's in line yet. And in fact, as the play progresses, that will be an interesting question to come back to at the end of the play. But Banquo and Fleance. And Fleance can be, you can play some different ages. I've seen Fleance played as a relatively young child on stage. I've seen Fleance played as an adult on stage. So there's some flexibility there, some interpretation in Fleance's character. So Banquo and Fleance are talking. We get a glimpse of Fleance here. We'll see a little more of him later. And then Macbeth comes in. And Macbeth has this line in response to Banquo regarding the weird sisters, the 3 witches. Banquo in Act 2, Scene 1, line 21 says, "I dreamt last night of the 3 weird sisters. To you they have showed some truth." And Macbeth lies. He says in response, in a shared line there, "I think not of them. Yet when we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business, if you would grant the time." So he lies. He says he hasn't been thinking about what the weird sisters prophesied. In truth, we know he and Lady Macbeth have been talking about it almost non-stop. Now, Banquo exits at this point, goes off together with Fleance. It's the night. Remember that Duncan is sleeping in Macbeth's castle here. Remember that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have made this plot to commit murder. And remember also, Macbeth isn't as resolved to do it as Lady Macbeth is. Not yet. He every time he talks to her, he gets closer and closer, but he still has this sort of uncertainty that we see still in Act 2. And one of the most famous soliloquies from the whole play comes right here, Act 2, Scene 1. "Is this a dagger which I see before me?" We're going to go through that together. If you are not following along already, open your book, open to Act 2, Scene 1, line 34. And let's take a closer look at this very famous passage. Macbeth's alone on stage. How you do the special effects can vary. Sometimes there's a shadow in front of him that looks like a dagger. Sometimes there's actually a dagger floating in front of him. Sometimes there's nothing. But in his mind, he sees a dagger. "Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand. Come, let me clutch thee." And you have to, there's an embedded stage direction there, so we see him grab for the dagger, but when he goes to grab for it, there's nothing there. It's airy nothing. He says, "I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind? Are you just, am I going crazy? Are you just in my mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as this which now I draw." So another embedded stage direction here. He draws his own dagger and he compares the dagger in his hand to this dagger, this ghost dagger that's floating in front of him. "Thou marshallest me the way I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still." So he's having this conversation on stage with this imaginary dagger. "And on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before." So in a performance, you can actually somehow do a special effect there, where suddenly the blood, the dagger starts dripping blood. Perhaps there's lots of opportunity, or maybe it's just all in his imagination, and the dagger doesn't change. But what he says he sees, what he reports seeing, is all that's there. "On thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before." There's no such thing. It's the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. And he goes on talking about, he goes on and he's really wrestling inside himself with what he's going to do here in a few minutes. Is this the right thing? Once he does it, he passes a point of no return. He can't go back from it. He says, now o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the current sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings. We're going to talk about Hecate in a future lecture. And withered murder alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howls his watch, thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides towards his design, moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabouts, and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. And then he says, and here's where he says, I got to do this. I've got to stop talking about it. I've got to do it. This is where Macbeth differs perhaps from Hamlet. Hamlet is sort of famous in his play. He's famous for waiting too long before he takes action. Macbeth is a man of action. He's not going to wait. Whilst I threat, he lives. Words of the heat of deeds, too cold breath gives. I go, and it is done. The bell invites me. So another embedded stage direction there. There's a bell going off, probably to mark the time. Earlier in the scene, in Act 2, Scene 1, the Banquo and Fleance were talking about what time it was and whether it was past midnight yet, whether or not the clock had struck 12. Well, now we hear it again. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell. A knell is a death bell. A knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. And that nice rhyming couplet ends Act 1, Scene 1. Now, Act 2, Scene 2, by the time it starts, the murder's done. The murder happens off stage. We don't see it. However, with that said, a director could make the decision to have it happen on stage. He could have it, there wouldn't be any lines attached to it, but he could decide to show Duncan's face, Duncan's body as he reacts to the murder, to being stabbed with a dagger. That's entirely possible, but it's not in the text. So that means that if it does happen, it happens without words. But there certainly could be facial expression, and several film versions choose to show this the power of this scene of the look in Duncan's eyes as he sees that yet once again he's put his faith in the wrong guy. Remember, he put an absolute trust in the former Thane of Cawdor. He put an absolute trust in Macbeth. It's all wrong. They both were traitors. Act 2, Scene 2 is Lady Macbeth. She's waiting impatiently. She did her part of the job. She went to the guards. She drugged them, put them to sleep, and then she took their daggers and put them so that Macbeth would be able to get them and use them. It's all part of the plot so that it looks like the guards are the one who committed the murder. Lady Macbeth has a really fascinating line as she's talking here. Lines 12 and 13. She says, I've done this. She's worried about whether Macbeth is going to mess this up. And she has this line, lines 12 and 13, halfway through line 12. Had he not resembled my father as he slept, had Duncan not looked like my father, I had done it. This is sort of the first time we see a crack in Lady Macbeth. We've seen lots of cracks in Macbeth. He's lots of times isn't sure that this is the right thing. Right up until the very act, he wasn't sure that this is the right thing. But here Lady Macbeth says, he looked kind of like my father. I could have done it myself, but he looked like my father. If he wouldn't have resembled my father, I would have done it. That's an interesting crack in her armor, and we're gonna explore that later. Because what we're gonna see happen as the play progresses, we're gonna see continued cracks in her armor as she breaks down from this, and where she starts off as the strong one, bent on doing this, she falls apart as the play progresses. And starting with that line, and we're gonna see Macbeth, his resolve only grow stronger as he takes her place in terms of being the one who's really resolved that we're doing this, we're moving forward. Still Act 2, Scene 2, but jumping a little bit more toward the end, we've got Lady Macbeth and Macbeth talking. Macbeth comes forward. He's brought the bloody daggers with him. And Lady Macbeth, that wasn't part of the plan. He's messed it up. This is line 50. Act 2, Scene 2, line 50. Follow along with me. Go get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hand. And then she sees the daggers. Why did you bring these daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go, carry them, and smear the sleepy grooms with blood. But here, Macbeth is broken at this point, and he's not going to do that. He can't go back and look on the dead body of Duncan. He can't go back. I'll go no more. I'm afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again. I dare not. He's not going back to look at it. And also throughout this scene, we heard the bell going off, the bell of the clock, and then all of a sudden there's knocking also going on in the background towards the end of the scene. That knocking, we're going to find out in the next scene who that is. We'll get to that in just a moment. But he hears that knocking, line 62. Whence is that knocking? How is it with me when every noise appalls me? And what hands are here? And he looks into his hands. So there's embedded stage directions throughout this. You have to pay attention to those so you can visualize what the actor is doing. He sees his hands. He looks at him. He says, they pluck out mine eyes. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? Will all the water in the ocean be enough to actually clean my hands from this blood? Metaphorically speaking. No. This my hand will weather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. This is a nice moment in Shakespeare. He says the exact same thing in line 66 and 67 there. The multitudinous seas incarnadine. Incarnadine is not a word we use very often in the 21st century. I don't think I've ever used it outside of reading Macbeth. You'd have to be a pretty educated person to know what that word means or look it up in the footnote. Incarnadine means to turn something red. My hands, rather than be able to be cleaned by the ocean, I would turn the whole ocean red from my red blood-stained hands. And then the very next line, Shakespeare, he translates that line into this little bit simpler form, making the green one red. It's a nice little touch where he says the same thing twice. Once for those who know, who have a really strong vocabulary, stronger than mine would have been, making the green one red, and then into some simpler language afterward. But he says the same thing. Now, Lady Macbeth comes back. She was off stage for a moment. She took the bloody daggers. She smeared the guards, or the grooms, as she calls them. Same thing. Guards are grooms. Another word for guards. She smears them with blood and leaves the daggers next to them. She's setting them up. She's making it look like they are the ones that went into Duncan's chamber, and they are the ones who murdered him. And she said, now her hands are red too. And they both hold their hands up to one another. She says, my hands are of your color, but I shame to wear a heart so white. And then there's more knocking. I hear knocking at the south entry. Retire we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed. And that's a nice little touch, because there's that antithesis again, where Macbeth just got done saying the whole ocean couldn't wash my hands clean. I would turn the ocean red before that. And she says, it's just a little water clears us of this deed. So a nice little touch there. Act 2, Scene 3. We find out where this knocking came from. And the knocking is actually, it is a new character we haven't quite met yet, but he's going to be very important the rest of the play. From here on out, he's probably the number 2, number 3 character in terms of importance. Macduff. Macduff is knocking, and Macduff had promised that he would go riding with the king in the morning. It's morning now. Here he is, and he's knocking at the door, and he's been knocking through all of Act 2, Scene 2, waiting to get in. And he has to wait a long time because the porter, the doorman, is quite drunk, and it's taking him some time to find his key and open the door. So we hear the knocking, and then we meet the porter. The porter's a really fun, fascinating character. He only appears in the scene, and then he disappears. He's sort of like the captain from earlier in the play. He just has this one small part, but it's a fun part to play, and it's a favorite one that people come back to. It's a comic part. It's funny. We have this very serious moment where we know we've got a dead king laying in his chamber, and then we have this really dark sort of humor coming from the porter. Let's take a closer look at his lines. He starts off, he's hearing the knocking. Here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have old turning the key. You're old turning the key all the time. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? In the name of Beelzebub. Here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. Come in time. Have napkins enough about you here. You'll sweat for it. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there in the other devil's name? So he goes on, and I won't read the whole passage. I'll jump to the end here. Knock, knock. This is about line 11 at the end of his speech. Never at quiet. What are you? But this place is too cold for hell. I'll devil porter it no further. I had thought to have let in some of all professions that go to the primrose way to the everlasting bonfire. Anon, anon. Then he opens up the gate. Pray you. Remember the porter. So there's a lot of fun that can be had in these lines. Now, Macduff isn't too happy. He's been knocking for a long time. He says, was it so late, friend, ere you went to bed, that you do lie so late? And here's where the porter admits he's been drinking. Faith, sir, we were carousing till the second cock, so until the rooster crowed a second time. And drink, sir, is a great provoker of 3 things. And I'm going to go into this line, although I wouldn't for high school students necessarily, but I'll go into it anyway since this is a college class. What 3 things does drink especially provoke? So he lists them. Mary, sir, nose painting, because if you drink too much, your nose turns red. Sleep, because if you drink too much, you pass out. And urine, because if you drink too much, you have to pee. And then he goes on, though, he adds to it, he says, lechery, sir, it provokes and unprovokes. Lechery is sexual desire. So it provokes sexual desire, but it unprovokes it as well. It provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. Therefore, much drink may be said to be an equivocator with lecherly. It makes him, and it mars him. It sets him on and takes him off. So too much drink makes you want sex. It makes you desire sexual activity, but it makes it difficult to engage in sexual activity. And he gets rather perverse here. I'll go ahead and read it. It persuades him and it disheartens him, makes him stand to and not stand to. In the hands of a good actor, this becomes rather risque kind of humor. He's using hand gestures to explain what stand to and not stand to might mean. In conclusion, equivocates him in a sleep and giving him the lie leaves him. Macduff ends it. He says, I believe drink gave thee the lie last night. And that's the end of the Porter scene is a lot of fun in the right hands, but it's definitely very much an adult kind of humor. Line 34, Macbeth is awakened. And he's heard this. He really isn't awake, and he never went to sleep. But he's got his hands finally clean. He's changed his clothes out of the any blood-stained clothes that he might have been wearing. And he comes down and he pretends to have been just woken up. And he says in line 34, "Good morrow, both," saying to Macduff and Lennox. Macduff says, "Is the king stirring, worthy thane?" Now he's playing the part here. He says, "No, not yet. I haven't heard from him yet." He knows the truth, but he's being the innocent flower, even though he's really the serpent under it at this point. Macduff says, "He did command me to call timely on him. I've almost slipped the hour." And Macbeth says, I'll bring you to him." So at this point, Macduff goes through and into the king's chambers, into Duncan's chambers, and he's in a moment he'll realize what's happening. He'll come back out. For a moment he's gone, and Lennox and Macbeth are left alone on stage to have this exchange. And Lennox has this. He explains to Macbeth, or says to Macbeth, "There's been a lot of weird things that happened last night." This is line 45. "The night has been unruly. Where we lay, our chimneys were blown down, so the wind was so strong it blew chimneys down. And as they say, lamentings heard in the air. Strange screams of death," so they were screaming in the night, and prophesying with accents terrible, "of dire combustion and confused events, new hatched to the woeful time. The obscure bird," that refers to the owl, "clamored the livelong nights." All night long, the owl was noisy. And some say the earth was feverish and did shake. Some say they felt earthquakes. Macbeth doesn't know what to say to this. These signs that something terrible has happened. It's similar in Julius Caesar. We see this too. On the night before Caesar is assassinated, there are all these signs that something terrible is about to happen. The same in this play. Macbeth can't say anything. He just says, "'Twas a rough night." That's all he can say. Of course it was a rough night. He murdered a king. At this point, as they're having this exchange, Macduff rushes back onto stage. "Oh, horror, horror." This is line 54. "Oh, horror, horror, tongue nor heart cannot conceive nor name thee." Macbeth and Lennox, "What's the matter?" "Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple, and stole thence the life of the building." "What is it you say? The life?" Macbeth says. He's still playing that innocent flower. "Mean you his majesty?" says Lennox. And then Macduff invites them in. "Approach the chamber and destroy your sight with a new Gorgon." A Gorgon is a monster. Medusa, if you know Medusa from Greek myth, was a Gorgon. Go on in there. It will destroy you. It will turn you to stone to see what's in there. "Do not bid me speak. See, and then speak yourselves." And Macbeth and Lennox then go into the chamber, and Macbeth pretends to realize that the king has been murdered, pretends not to know what really happened. Lennox sees it for the first time, just like Macduff did. They come back out and they ring the alarm bells, wake everyone up, wake up Duncan's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain. They both come out and have this sort of what on earth has just happened, trying to figure things out. Their king has been murdered right beneath them, and also they know quite frankly that whoever murdered him is right. It's got to be there. The murderer couldn't have gone too far. And also they see the guards though, and they see them covered in blood, and they see that their daggers were covered in blood. So they certainly look guilty, but there's a little twist on that. We'll get to that in just a moment. So it's asked. Malcolm says, who did this? Who murdered our father? And Lennox answers, line 94. Those of his chamber, as it seemed, had done it. Their hands and faces were all badged with blood. So it looks like the guards did it. They're all covered in blood. So were their daggers, which unwiped we found upon their pillows. They stared and were distracted. No man's life was to be trusted with them. So Lennox, it looks like the guards did it. Your father's own guards did this to him. And then Macbeth has a fascinating moment. He says, "Oh, yet I do repent me of my fury that I did kill them." So when he went in that room, he saw the guards there. He killed them. So these is his second and third murders already that he's up to. And he killed them because he was just so enraged. At least this is what he says. He was so enraged at what they had done to Duncan. Now Macduff and everyone around him kind of pause and say, "Wait. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have killed them. We should have at least heard what they said, what they had to say about this. They might have had some other evidence. We should have listened first before you did that." Macduff says, "Wherefore did you so?" Just a quick side note. Wherefore in Shakespeare means why. So in Romeo and Juliet, when you hear, "Wherefore art thou Romeo?" she's not saying, "Where are you Romeo?" She's saying, "Why are you Romeo?" Same here. Why did you do so? Wherefore did you do so? In line 100. And Macbeth's defense, he doesn't have a good defense other than, who can be both amazed in an instant and also who can. I'm just a man. I made a mistake. He says, "Who can be wise, amazed, temperate, and furious, loyal and neutral in a moment? No man. The expedition of my violent love outran the pause or reason." So yes, it wasn't smart of me to kill them, but I loved my king, and I was so angry when I saw what those guards did. He's lying here. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs looked like a breach in nature, for ruin's wasteful entrance. They are the murderers, steeped in the colors of their trade, their daggers unmannerly breached with gore. Who could refrain that had a heart to love, and in that heart courage to make love's known? And Lady Macbeth realizes that Macbeth is sort of screwed up here, and he doesn't have an answer to the question. So she faints. that's her help. "Help me hence, ho!" And she faints, and Macduff says, "Look to the lady." She gives a distraction so that he doesn't have to keep going in this answer. The truth is he killed those guards because the guards are going to say, we didn't do it. And maybe the others would believe them. Let's just go with it looks like they did it. That'll work for the moment at least. However, we still have Malcolm and Donalbain here. Malcolm is the oldest son of the king, the now dead king. Donalbain, his younger son. And they've got to decide what to do. And remember, these guys would have known those guards. These guards were trusted with the king's life probably for decades. This doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, and they know that it's probably not true that those guards committed the murder. They know that whoever did commit the murder, though, is still free and running around, and they also know that whoever killed the king is probably more than willing to kill the next king, the Prince of Cumberland. Malcolm. And so they decide they're not going to stick around until they figure things out. Line 128, Malcolm says, "What will you do? Let's not consort with them. Let's not talk to the others, because we don't know which one of them did this. To show an unfelt sorrow is an office which the false man does easy. It's easy for them to pretend that they're devastated by the murder. That's easy for a false man to do." And Malcolm ends line 130, "All to England." He's going to go to England. Donalbain says, "To Ireland." So we've got them going each their separate ways. And Donalbain explains, "Our separated fortunes shall keep us both the safer. If we split up and get out of here, we'll both be safer. Where we are, right here in Scotland, in Macbeth's castle, there's daggers in men's smiles. The nearer in blood, the nearer bloody." And Malcolm ends the scene. "This murderous shaft that shot had not yet lighted. So whatever this murderer is up to, he's not done yet. And our safest way is to avoid the aim. Therefore, to horse, and let us not be dainty of leave-taking, but shift away. There's warrant in that theft, which steals itself when there's no mercy left." Another nice rhyming couplet to end the scene. Act 2, Scene 4 is quite a short scene, just a little, 41 lines, and it starts with this old man and Ross talking. Now, if you're getting confused about some of the minor characters, Ross, remember, is the one back in Act 1 who first delivered the news to Macbeth that he would become Thane of Cawdor. So Ross sort of has these little messenger kinds of roles throughout the play. He's there through to the end, and we'll see more of him later, but he's a pretty small part. So he's talking with this old man, and they continue talking about these signs. There's more signs that they're talking about that they saw. And let's take a look at what some of those were. The old man in line 10, he says, "'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done. On Tuesday last, a falcon, towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed." So an owl killed a falcon. That's an interesting sign, and signs with birds in them it's a very Greek kind of sign as well. There's all sorts of signs with birds in Greek myth too. So the idea that a falcon would kill an owl, or that an owl would kill a falcon, that's out of place. That's not natural. Owls don't kill falcons. They're not the stronger. Falcons are the stronger birds. And then Ross has another sign he's seen about the horses. He says, "And Duncan's horses, a thing most strange and certain, beauteous and swift, the minions of their race." So these horses that are the best horses in the land, turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out, contending against obedience as they would make war with mankind. Old man says, "'Tis said they ate each other." They ate each other. Ross says, "They did so to the amazement of my own eyes that looked upon it." So we have this situation where these formerly very regal, stoic horses of the king turned on one another, and they actually ate each other. That's a bizarre sign. Why are these bizarre things happening? And it's the same as in Caesar, from Julius Caesar. Weird, bizarre things happen when kings are killed. And that's what we're seeing in this too. Now Macduff comes on, and Macduff, we met him. He was the one doing all the knocking before trying to get in. He's supposed to go riding with the king. Now he comes to talk with Ross and the old man a little bit more, and they're going to talk about how it happens next. Line 25. Line 25, Malcolm and Donalbain. "The king's two sons are stolen away and fled, which puts upon them suspicion of the deed." So the fact that Malcolm and Donalbain leave, that plays right into Macbeth's hand. He can use that to say, well, the guards might have committed the murder, but it looks like maybe Malcolm and Donalbain themselves were in on it. And that's the sort of the idea that spread. But that doesn't really make sense. Because Malcolm would have been in line to be king if he wouldn't have left. But he left because he knew he wasn't safe there, and quite frankly, he wasn't. We know that back in Act 1, Macbeth had said, "The Prince of Cumberland, that's an obstacle I'm going to have to step over. I'm going to have to figure out a way around that." He was more than willing to kill Malcolm too, or find a way to kill him. So Malcolm was right to run away, but then it makes him look guilty in some eyes, but really it's not very convincing if you think about this logically. Ross responds, "'Gainst nature still, thriftless ambition that will raven up thine own life's means. Then 'tis most like the sovereignty will fall upon Macbeth." So he's saying, okay, so it sounds with Malcolm and Donalbain both out of the picture, I think that's Macbeth is next in line, right? He should be king. Macduff responds, he says, "Yeah, you're right." And this is line 31 and 32. "He's already named and gone to Scone to be invested." He's already gone to take his vows and become king. And that's where we leave off in Act 2, knowing that Macbeth is about to become king. By the time we are in Act 3, he's already been named king. Malcolm and Donalbain are each fled in separate directions, and the whole kingdom is left sort of in this chaos, not really knowing yet exactly what has happened, what happened to the king, what happened to Duncan. Although as the play proceeds and as we work through the following acts, we're going to see more and more people starting to figure out that something just doesn't feel right about Macbeth becoming king. All right, we'll save that for our next lecture when we come back for Act 3.